Welcome back, everyone, to the Risk Intel podcast, powered by SRA Watchtower, where we share risk intelligence with experts from across the banking industry. I'm your host, Ed Vincent, CEO at SRA Watchtower. Hello, welcome to the Risk Intel podcast. I am very excited to have back with me on the show today, Jeff Fink, who brings some unique perspective to our topic of the day here around data strategy. And Jeff, we're thrilled to have you back on, and thanks very much for giving us the time.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Good to be back.
Jeff, we're going to spend a little bit of time today talking about data strategy and how a financial institution can really start from nothing, kind of get out of the starting gate, if you will, right? We've spoken in our prior conversations about a bit more of the theoretical, right? Data architecture, data governance, and risk mitigation around data strategy. Today, I'd like to take it from the really more the practical side, which is how do you get going? How do you shift minds to get out of the starting gate, if you will, get from stuck to start? Before we jump straight into that, though, I'd love it if you'd share a little bit of your background, because you've been involved in data strategy both as a founder and a practitioner of your business, but also inside large financial large core providers who have been involved in data strategy. So perhaps a refresher for folks on your experience in this data strategy realm.
Yeah, sure, Ed. Yes, I've had founder or co-founder of three different analytics, business intelligence, data warehousing businesses that were definitely data centric and focused on how do we help our customers build a data strategy from scratch, or obviously leveraging technology to help in the use of data throughout their organization. So I've been involved on the product side and the management of how can we better serve our customers by bringing solutions to the table that are data centric. And then, as you mentioned, I've also worked for two different core vendors, and for financial institutions, and really got to see the broader picture there of it's not always, in the analytics and reporting business, it's about summarized and aggregated and trended data that is kind of the bigger picture. But when you think about the core system, transaction processing, very granular level data. And to me, the two they are both needed. There's use cases for it's all data, and what are the use cases, and how can we leverage it as an asset in our institution, and try to get return on that asset. And so have been, I guess, at different levels, and thinking about different sets of data. I've been involved in a lot of different organizations that have been data focused and data centric.
Jeff, with that as a backdrop, right?
Yeah.
Right. Clearly, you've been in this, been kind of confronting this question for some time.
Yeah.
When we spoke last time, we approached this topic perhaps a bit more from the risk officer's perspective.
Yeah.
And there's another lens here, because the data strategy that an organization contemplates and then it embarks upon executing against is often can be driven by the risk officer. I was just at a multi-billion-dollar bank in New York, and they said that they were driving their data strategy because to them, enterprise risk management was about breaking down silos and bringing together, aggregating in data and information together to create thoughtful outcomes to make risk-informed decisions. That being said, doesn't always start with risk, right? Oftentimes it's the chief technology officer, the information officer, chief data officer, or even a CFO or CEO. And so, in your experience, right, whether you're interacting with those folks or the risk folks, I imagine that one of the places, or one of the challenges that some institutions will face is, how do I even start, right? We talk about inertia and kind of being set in our ways. So maybe that's the first question for you is, right?
Yeah.
Why do community banks feel that this is hard to get started with?
Yeah, I know there's a lot of different analogies for that, whether it's boiling the ocean or, just taking bites or trying to think about how do I accomplish everything all at once? I think in this case, that's the wrong strategy. I think a more best practices approach is, you know, as you said, how do I get started? Like, just need to get started. And I think it is a step-by-step process, very incremental. Um, and I think some of that is around, thinking about larger corporations that, the big data has that term has been around for quite a while now. And you really do think about, oh, I'm just never going to be able to bring all of this together because of the complexity. You've already mentioned siloed, data and siloed information. So yes, that can be, complex. The infrastructure necessary to do these things and to make sense of all this data that we have throughout a given organization is expensive and takes a lot of thought and specialized skill sets to bring together. So I think that's why there's hesitation or delay in getting started. But I like, and I've thought this for a while. Let's change the conversation from about how do I do everything and how do I boil the ocean to how do I just get incremental value, and let me just start there. And so I like to focus, from a data perspective, focusing on, data is just a tool that we have in the toolbox, and so thinking about it as a risk management tool or an efficiency tool of doing less manual processing and more automated processing. If we think of data as a tool to accomplish those things, like, I think it focuses on the value instead of uh, the infrastructure and the architecture to get some of these things done that can be daunting or take years, to implement. And I know you hear it a lot, but I do believe in it that there, excuse me, there needs to be a culture change or at least, a culture set from the top, that, we are a data centric, institution, and we are going to focus on data. So setting that example from the top that we're going to make fact-based decisions and rely less on gut reactions, which I know is sometimes hard to get started on that path too. But I think it's important to show that that discipline, and then build those competencies over time. Just take it a step at a time. Make data centric and bringing data together, make data part of objectives that are being set on a routine basis, so that we're always leaving room, for the departments in the organization to build that into their goals, for a month or a quarter, so that they can have that constant improvement because they're thinking about, okay, how do I bring data into whatever problem I'm trying to solve, and just make that a standard part of the way we do business. And and again, thinking about that, how do I get started, or what are those incremental steps? I think, just thinking about, where do I have some manual processes, and what can I do to automate? That usually involves data. I can use data to make sure that I'm thinking about key data elements and thinking about making them available, to those decision makers who need it on a routine basis, so that, when they're trying to solve a problem, they're not thinking, okay, I got to go reinvent the wheel each time. There's a standard process in place with data elements, that are available and that they're accurate, and timely. So if that's part of the culture, I think that's a good way to get started too. And then lastly, I think about, maybe just a suggestion or a pitfall to avoid is that what I said about, creating that data culture doesn't equate to how do I just create more reports and make those available. And we just keep adding and adding and adding to a report set that most likely is not going to be used, completely, and you're building in, some some debt there that will need to be addressed at some point, and usually, things just fall off. But it takes time, manual effort, and thinking about the cost of infrastructure too. If you just keep ballooning that set of reports, like that doesn't equate to value in my mind. And sometimes, yes, reporting obviously is a key piece and it's needed. But thinking about, where can I make sure that it's focused, and again, thinking about data and data that's displayed in reports as just a tool, and that we're keeping it to those things that are key data elements, and we're presenting them in a way that users can digest, then they're valuable and will be used. But just that thinking, let's avoid that pitfall of saying, okay, if I create 10 more reports, then I'm a data-centric institution. It takes more than that. And again, focusing on the data instead of the report presentation, I think is one way to do that over time.
Jeff, you shared a few different anecdotes and concepts along the way, changing the conversation to how do I get incremental value was one of the things you said, right? Focusing on value, that cultural change, and setting the example from the top. Um, it seems like in all of the items you mentioned, it was really about thinking big but starting small. Maybe is a way to encapsulate that all under one heading. Um, and it seems like for community financial institutions in particular, the idea of thinking big can be daunting because when you think big, then you feel like you have to go big or start big. Um, but the reality is these community financial institutions need to think big because that's who they are competing against in this day and
Yeah.
age, right? It's not just the institution down the street because the geographical boundaries are no longer relevant. So you really are competing against other community banks or regional banks throughout the country. And so you do need to think big, and you do have to embark upon this because otherwise you're going to get left behind.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It's where I guess back to that, where do I start? And I do continue to focus. I always go back to we just need to get started, and one of the ways to do that, and then if I'm going to compete against those regional or national players, then I just have to keep climbing that ladder. And one of the ways I do that, I believe, is addressing, individual pain points that can be solved by data, or at least helped, by data. And so things like manual reporting or analyzing customer churn, inefficient or onboarding of customers that takes too long, like thinking about, those process-oriented components, and how we can use data to measure and monitor what's going on there. Like I think identifying those pain points, and then thinking about it of, we're not going to undertake, a multi-year transformation project, to accomplish any of these things. Let's just think about it, in a 60, 90-day, type of proof of concept. Let's form the hypothesis, and then let's prove it out, or prove it or disprove it. Does data help, for this situation? So let's get some data together. Maybe it's just one department like retail or credit, and let's pick a pain point, and let's bring some data to the table with some of the decision makers, and let's see if it makes a difference. Partnering with vendors, who can help, set up proof of concepts or sandboxes that help make more data accessible, and provide some tools that can help you work with that data. I think is another avenue or another path to go down. And that just that thought process of what I need to do, or what I'm going to do, does not need to be transformational or massive. It just needs to provide value. It just needs to be meaningful, and let's get started there, and then just build on that. And again, sometimes that just automation of manual processes around a pain point is a good way to get people thinking about, okay, now I have more time in the day. I'm not just a data collector. I'm now a data analyst, and I can make decisions using data that I don't have to spend my entire month process just collecting. Now I can think about, what do I do with it? How do I make this more meaningful?
Yeah, the concept there of establishing some quick wins to build momentum, I think maybe is the way to think about that you talked about identifying individual pain points or solve with data, and you shared a couple of examples there, analyzing customer churn, measuring how laborious an onboarding process is. Um, those those feel a lot more manageable, if you will, something that you
Yeah.
can wrap your arms around, and potentially you can even answer some of those questions without making a full investment in a modern data platform and an entire data infrastructure. Instead, even if it means you cobble data together in order to use data to answer those questions, if you do that, it feels like perhaps that is the first step in then creating some momentum to create the business case to then think about a modern data platform and the infrastructure. But really the first step is getting the analysis together and getting that information in front of decision makers for them to, as you said, kind of get that organizational buy-in, the culture of using data to make decisions.
Yeah.
And feels like that is then a starting point for then how do you scale, right? Once you get a couple of those examples in place and you get people to pay attention to it, where do you go from there?
Yeah, you're right. You've got that foundation, and you can just build on that. And then that eventually gets you to, a longer term strategy, and you've built some foundation underneath you. And when I think about foundation, when I think about, what are we putting in place that can last more than just one project? I always go back to the data governance side of things. Not an exciting topic for some. It's difficult to think about because some of it's about standards and policies, and thinking about, how does our organization, use data, and make sure we do it in a safe way. Um, I know that's not exciting all the time, but just small pieces there, I think, make a big difference as well. Thinking about, who owns data, so that data ownership of, just making sure that we have someone that's going to be, accountable, for data elements of a certain subject area, and defining that across departments too. I think is important. I think defining, and laying out for the entire organization, what some standard definitions are, on some key terms that we just need to make sure we don't waste time on thinking, wait, what does this mean? And does it mean X or does it mean Y? Things like active customer, or what defines, a delinquent loan. I know those sound simple, but there's turnover in the organization, and new people coming in, and just making sure everyone is reading from that, same playbook. I think is important, and it does fall under, data governance, and again, doesn't have to be super formal, processes and standards and policies, but some of these basics about ownership, about having clearly defined, standard definitions, and then, access controls, about thinking about, safety, making sure that the right people, have access to the right data, and that we're not exposing, sensitive, personally identifiable information. PII is obviously a key piece here in this industry, and making sure that that is ultra secure is one of the top priorities. But that does fall under data governance. So I think about that, and somewhat related to that, setting up a network of what we call data stewards. Those, really thinking about it again, not as a true formalized process, but maybe just starting off with just identifying people in each department that really know the operational systems well. They can help with data quality issues and understanding what those data quality issues might be, and giving some input to what standards could be for data quality, and really, also acting as a liaison, from the business line, to IT. Obviously, a lot of the data infrastructure that we're talking about, relies or lies within IT. So there does need to be, that hand holding and or that connection, between the business lines and IT. So having those data stewards that can act as liaisons and go-betweens there, I think is pretty important. And then lastly, what I would say is, making governance, more business led, not just a compliance exercise. Yes, that's important too, but thinking about it, that we're really baking governance into our business processes, launching of new products, defining data elements that and then some reporting guidelines that are going to be important to a process like launching a new product. If that just kind of goes hand in hand, understanding the data that's important in that process, I think that again falls under data governance, but really is just a good business practice of being more fact-based and having a data culture, so that we can build. I mean, to me, this is the goal. Like, one of those overarching goals is that we need to think about data as being complete, organized, and accurate. And and there's a lot of data that doesn't meet those qualifications. And if it doesn't, then sometimes it's not even helpful in the decision making process. So thinking about what we're creating needs to be meaningful, and doing that a step at a time, having a business led approach to that, and then really just thinking about the platform. I know, Ed, you mentioned up front about architecture and the modern data platform. um, yes, that's a great thing. Some institutions are further along than others, but the way I think about it is you just have, you want just enough technology, to support, what you're trying to accomplish. And it doesn't have to be, let's build
Mm.
all the rails, ahead of time, because that can be expensive, multi-year project. Let's just do it, incrementally over time. And again, think about it as we're creating a data centric organization, and we're going to do it a step at a time. And then by the time we're a year or two into it, a lot more mature organization that is making fact-based decisions, and really helping better serve customers. And that's to me the ultimate goal.
Jeff, you've you've identified you know a great prescription, right, for getting out of the starting gate there, right? Making governance more business led, establishing a network of data stewards, right? All those those activities that come after you take one step at a time. So you get going one step at a time. You start adding some of those elements that will allow you to build on that foundation, right? And finding a platform that will allow you to. I love that phrase. You use just enough technology to support what you're trying to accomplish, right? So I think if I go back to really the first question we asked here, which was, how do you make the mindset shift from being stuck to start? Right. I think you've broken down what can be something that is daunting and all encompassing and quite heavy and large, and getting it into something that is manageable. Uh, getting some of those, still thinking big, but yeah, acting, starting small, and then getting folks to scale from there. And so I think if you get some of those quick wins under your belt, you'll get organizational support, right? So those folks that we mentioned, at
Yeah.
the outset here, right? Right, if that CFO gets some intelligence that can be shared, right, on the next, investor call, or in their next management committee meeting, or or the information officer is able to come in and say, I've empowered my lending team with this insight that is allowing us to unearth an opportunity within our existing book of business, right? All of a sudden you get a win, and then you start to build on top of that, on top of that, on top of that.
Yeah. Yep, those small wins and data being tied, to the goal setting process, what we're trying to achieve, each period, just tying data into those objectives. And, I really think, I don't think we said this, quite this way, but, I know banking is, a relationship business. And we don't want, and I want to make sure that I say that, my vision is not that data replaces, those relationships and how a bank operates, but it sure can support, the relationship banking, and it can be a big tool or a big driver to help customers and help better serve customers. And so to me, it's a tool in that process, not a replacement, for relationship banking.
Right, ultimately making data enabled and risk informed decisions, right, is going to empower that individual to be a lot more successful.
That's right.
Well, Jeff, this has been a really great conversation. I appreciate you helping people think about, taking, these big ideas and making them manageable and actionable, and starting small and getting out of the starting gate, getting to incremental value, as you said earlier,
Yeah.
and starting with that mindset and setting that example from the top. So, right, the technology officer, the data officer, the information officer, the CFO, the CEO, helping them feel comfortable that yes, we can dip our toe in the water here. Hopefully, this inspires some of them to take that initial action. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Yeah.